The Light Division was a light infantry division of the British Army. Its origins lay in light companies, formed during the late 18th century, to move at speed over inhospitable terrain and protect a main force with skirmishing tactics. These units also, significantly, took advantage of their new technology in the form of rifles, which allowed it to emphasize marksmanship, and were aimed primarily at disrupting and harassing enemy forces in skirmishes before the main forces clashed. Formed in 1803, during the Napoleonic Wars, the Light Division was re-raised 3 times subsequently, during the Crimean War, the First World War and from 1968 to 2007. Some light infantry units remained outside the Light Division. Origins of the Light Division. The British Army's first 3 Rifle Battalion was raised by the 60th in 1797–99. The command of this 1st Rifle Battalion was given to Francis de Rottenberg, who had extensive experience with light infantry. While the 60th did not officially become part of the Light Division, it and Rottenberg were influential in terms of British Army doctrine regarding rifle-armed light infantry. In 1800, an experimental corps of riflemen was raised by Colonel Coote Manningham and Lieutenant Colonel John William Stewart, drawn from officers and other ranks from drafts of a variety of British regiments. The corps differed in several regards from the line infantry of the British Army. Most significantly, it was armed with the formidable Baker rifle, which was more accurate and of longer range than the musket, although it took longer to load. As the rifle was shorter than the musket, it was issued with a 21-inch sword bayonet. Riflemen wore dark green jackets rather than the bright red coats of the British line infantry regiments of the time, pantaloons rather than breeches, black leather facings and belts rather than white, and a green plume on their stovepipe shakos. They were trained to work alone or in pairs, in open order, and to think for themselves. Napoleonic Wars. 4 months after its formation, the Rifle Corps was judged ready for its first operation. On the 25th of August 1800, 3 companies, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel William Stewart, spearheaded the British amphibious landing at Ferrol, Spain, where the rifles helped to dislodge the Spanish defenders on the heights. However, the expedition was defeated and withdrew the following day. In 1801, 1 company of the Corps, under the command of Captain Sidney Beckwith, served as marksmen aboard Royal Navy ships at the First Battle of Copenhagen. During the battle, the Rifle Corps suffered 1 lieutenant killed, its first officer to fall, and 2 other ranks killed and 6 wounded, some of whom died later. In January 1803, the Corps became an established regular regiment and was renamed the 95th Regiment of Foot. On the 17th of July 1803, an unofficial Corps of Light Infantry was formed, by brigading together the 43rd Regiment, the 52nd Regiment of Foot and the 95th Regiment. General Sir John Moore finished training the 43rd, 52nd, and 95th in September 1805, because the 3 rifle battalions of the 60th Royal Americans were already wearing the green clothing and black leather equipment that were typical of Continental Light Infantry. The 95th Rifles adopted the same uniform as the 60th, but despite the best efforts of Moore, the other light infantry regiments were ordered to conform to the regulations for light companies of line regiments by retaining the red jackets, armed with the Baker rifle and wearing dark green uniforms. The green jackets were hard to spot and spent the time sniping at enemy officers, NCOs and any other figure of authority in an enemy formation. A well-aimed shot could bring down an enemy commander with ease, lowering morale in the enemy. The Baker rifle rifle had far greater accuracy and range than the standard muskets of the time, and the men using them were considered marksmen, trading devastating firepower for superior accuracy and range. In 1807, Denmark, while officially neutral, was suspected by the British of planning to ally itself with France. The Corps of Light Infantry, led by Sir Arthur Wellesley, the future Duke of Wellington, was part of a force that defeated Danish forces at the Siege of Køge and Second Battle of Copenhagen, and with the entire Danish fleet. The Corps of Light Infantry, under Moore, sailed for Spain for what would become known as the Peninsular War. The campaign established the value of light infantry armed with rifles. 4 further battalions were trained by Rottenberg in the Curragh of Kildare in Ireland during May 1808. Later, Rottenberg returned to England and, at Brabdornley's barracks in Ashford, retrained the 68th, 85th and 71st Regiments as light infantry, to help meet the demand for such troops in the peninsula. During the Peninsular War of 1808 to 1809, Cacador companies of the Portuguese army were attached to the 95th Regiment. Battle of Corunna. The Battle of Corunna was an attack by 16,000 French under Marshal Soult during the amphibious evacuation of 16,000 British under General Sir John Moore. Moore had hoped to draw the French army away from Portugal, to allow the small British force in that country to be reinforced, and to allow the Spanish armies to reform. Hugely outnumbered, Moore was forced to retreat. Made in a harsh winter and under constant pressure, the retreat severely tried his men. The exhausting marches, cold weather and frequent skirmishes with the pursuing French units saw many fall to illness, exhaustion, or to turn to alcohol and become so drunk that they were left behind. The Light Division was one of the few units that kept its discipline and, along with units of British cavalry, fought a series of rearguard actions against the French. The brigade then fought at Corunna, where the French were repulsed. It was then sent to Vigo for embarkation. Thomas Plunkett was a rifleman in the 95th Rifles. During the retreat, Plunkett shot the French general the brigade Auguste Marie-François Colbert at a range of between 200 and 600 meters using a Baker rifle. Plunkett had run forward to make this shot, and before returning to his own lines he reloaded, and shot a trumpet major who had rushed to the aid of the fallen general. This second feat showed that the first shot had not been a fluke, and the deaths were sufficient to throw the pending French attack into disarray. The shots were at a sufficiently long distance to impress others in the 95th Rifles, whose marksmanship was far better than the ordinary British soldier who, armed with a brown bess musket, was trained to shoot into a body of men at 50 meters with volley fire. Battle of Talavera. While reforming in England after their evacuation from Corunna, Brigadier General Robert Crawford was ordered to take his brigade, now composed of the 1st Battalion of the 43rd, 1st Battalion of the 52nd and 1st Battalion of the 95th, back to the peninsula. The brigade landed at Lisbon on the 2nd of July 1809 and embarked on a series of grueling marches in the July heat to join Arthur Wellesley, 1st Duke of Wellington's army. Although at times averaging 30 miles per day, Wellesley fought and won the battle while the Light Brigade was still pouring sweat on the road. The riflemen of the 60th performed sterling service in their absence, being one of the few regiments mentioned by name in Wellesley's dispatch to the British government. During the reorganizations that followed, Crawford was given command of the 3rd Division, whose previous commander, Major General Mackenzie, had been killed at Talavera. With the subsequent addition of Captain Hugh Ross's troop of Royal Horse Artillery, the 1st Hussars of the K.G.L. and the Portuguese 3rd Cacadores Battalion, this became the Light Division. Crawford also wrote the first standing orders for the Light Division, a training manual and handbook. Battle of the River Coa. Crawford's operations on the Coa and Agueda in 1810 were daring to the point of rashness. The drawing on of the French forces into what became the Battle of the River Coa, in particular, was a rare lapse in judgment that almost saw his removal from command. Although Wellington censured him for his conduct, he at the same time increased his force to a full division by the addition of 2 picked regiments of Portuguese Cacadores, Chestnut True, Royal Horse Artillery and AMP, part of the 14th and AMP 16th Light Dragoons. Battle of Barsaco. The Battle of Barsaco was a defensive battle won by the Allies which allowed Wellington to resume the retreat of his army into the previously fortified lines of Torres Vedras. He reached these by the 10th of October. Finding the lines too strong to attack, the French withdrew into winter quarters. Deprived of food and harried by British hit-and-run tactics, the French lost 25,000 men captured or dead from starvation or sickness before they retreated into Spain early in 1811, freeing Portugal from French occupation except for Almeida, near the frontier. During the retreat, the Battle of Sabugal was also fought. Battle of Sabugal. The Battle of Sabugal. Crawford had taken ill and was home in England, so the division was under the command of Major General William Erskine. The plan was for the Light Division and 2 brigades of cavalry to circle behind the French open left flank while the other 4 divisions attacked the front. On the day of the battle there was a heavy fog. The other commanders decided to wait until visibility improved. Undeterred, Erskine ordered Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Sidney Beckwith's 1st Brigade forward. Instead of crossing the Coa beyond the French, the brigade drifted to the left in the fog, crossed at the wrong location and struck the French left flank. Erskine, who was very nearsighted and mentally unbalanced, then became cautious and issued explicit instructions to Colonel George Drummond not to support his fellow brigade commander. At this point, Erskine rode off to join the cavalry, leaving the light division leaderless for the rest of the battle. The French switched most to the 10,000-man corps against Beckwith's 1,500 and pressed the light infantry back. When Drummond heard the sounds of battle approaching, he deduced that Beckwith's men were retreating. Disobeying orders, Drummond led his 2nd Brigade across the Coa and joined Beckwith. Together they drove the French back. Battle of Fuentes de Onoro. At the Battle of Fuentes de Onoro, the 51st Foot and 85th Light Infantry, along with the Light Division, demonstrated how the French cavalry could be beaten by a combination of rapid movements, accurate rifle fire and disciplined formations. During the battle, the Light Division was sent to reinforce the 51st and 85th Light Infantry, who had been caught in open ground and surrounded by French cavalry. When reinforced, the whole force was able to retire rapidly, chased by the French cavalry. Whenever the French came close, the light infantrymen, riflemen and cacadores rapidly formed squares at the last safe moment, beating off the cavalry. This series of rapid moves, combined with the disciplined forming of squares off the line of march, was a spectacle that few could have believed to have been possible. Siege of Ciudad Rodrigo. The division, now once again under the command of Major General Robert Crawford, was involved in the Siege of Ciudad Rodrigo, where they stormed and took the Grand Teson redoubt. Then on the 19th of January, together with Major General Thomas Picton's 3rd Division, they were ordered to storm the city. Picton's division assaulting the greater breach in the northwest of the city's walls, while the Light Division was sent against the lesser breach in the north. Launched at 7 p.m. The assault was completely successful, although amongst the dead were Major Generals Henry Mackinnon and Crawford. The victory was somewhat marred when the British rank and file thoroughly sacked the city, despite the efforts of their officers. Battle of Salamanca. Following on from the siege of Ciudad Rodrigo and the death of Crawford, the division, now under the command of Charles Alton, was held as the reserve division for the Battle of Salamanca and did not take a major part in the fighting. Battle of Vittoria. At the Battle of Vittoria, the division was part of the right-center column under Wellington's personal direction. Wellington launched his attack in 4 columns, and after hard fighting the enemy's center was broken and soon the French defense crumbled. About 5,000 French soldiers were killed or wounded and 3,000 were taken prisoner, while Wellington's forces suffered about 5,000 killed or wounded. 152 cannons were captured, but King Joseph Bonaparte narrowly escaped. The battle led to the collapse of Napoleonic rule in Spain. Battle of the Pyrenees. During the French withdrawal across the Pyrenees and into France, the Light Division was involved in the Battle of the Pyrenees and the Battle of the Bidassoa, during which the toughest fighting of the day occurred in Major General Bertrand Clausel's centre sector. John Colborne's brigade of Charles Alton's Light Division attacked Le Bayonet. Not waiting for the attack, the French charged downhill and drove back the 95th Rifles. Suddenly the 52nd appeared and quickly turned the tables. Following closely behind the retreating French, they overran the redoubt with surprising ease. Meanwhile, James Kempt's 2nd Light Division Brigade and Francisco de Longa's Spanish Division attacked up 2 spurs of Mont Laroon to secure some positions. The next day the French abandoned the position to avoid encirclement. Battle of Nivelles. The Battle of Nivelles started just before dawn as the Light Division headed towards the plateau on the summit of the Greater Rhône. The objective of the division was to sweep the 3 defensive forts constructed by the French out of the battle. They moved down into the ravine in front of the Lesser Rhône and were ordered to lie down and await the order to attack. After the signal from a battery of cannon, the offensive began. It started with the 43rd, 52nd and 95th, with the Portuguese Cacadores in support, storming the redoubts on the crest of the Rhône. Despite this being a risky move and the men being almost exhausted, the surprise and boldness of the British sent the French fleeing towards other forts on other hills, while the 43rd and 95th were dealing with the French on the Rhône. There still remained one very strong star-shaped fort below on the Muiz Plateau which reached out towards the coast. This was attacked by Colborne's 52nd, supported by riflemen from the 95th. Once again, the French were surprised and the British succeeded. They had, in the French eyes, appeared from the ground, at which point, in danger of being cut off. The French soldiers quickly fled, leaving Colborne in possession of the fort and other trenches without loss of a single fatal casualty. Battle of Toulouse. The final action of the Peninsular War was the Battle of Toulouse. In the evening of the 10th of April 1814, Marshal Soult received an official communiqué from Paris informing him that Napoleon had surrendered to the coalition forces in northern France. Unsure of what to do, Soult's generals advised him to surrender the city, as reinforcements were unlikely to arrive, and further news reached Toulouse informing Soult of the surrender of French armies across France. This ended the Peninsular War, claimed to be one of the strongest divisions in the British Army in the Peninsular War. The Light Division proved its tough nature in the numerous actions it had been involved in, from the infamous retreat to Corunna right up until the invasion of France in 1814 and the conclusion of the war at the Battle of Toulouse. Structure during the Peninsular War. Commanding Generals: Robert Crawford, William Erskine, Charles Alton. 1st Brigade 143rd Road Regiment 1, 95th Rifles 3, 95th Rifles 3rd Portuguese Cacadores. 2nd Brigade 1, 52nd Regiment of Foot 2, 95th Rifles 1, 17th Portuguese Line 2, 17th Portuguese Line 1st Portuguese Cacadores. Divisional Troops: Ross Troop, Royal Horse Artillery, part of the 14th Light Dragoons, part of the 16th Light Dragoons. Waterloo. After the abdication of Napoleon in 1814 and his exile to the island of Elba, the Peninsular Army was dismantled and divided. Following Napoleon's escape and return to power in France, there was one more battle to fight. A light division by name was not formed for Waterloo, but the light infantry battalions, excepting the 1st Battalion of the 95th, which was assigned to the 5th Division, were massed into the 3rd British Brigade assigned to the 2nd Division. The 3rd Brigade was commanded by then Major General Frederick Adam. The other brigades were foreign troops, with the 1st Brigade consisting of 4 line battalions of the King's German Legion and 3rd Brigade consisting of 4 battalions of Hanoverian Landwehr. Since the British Army had so few light troops, 16 of 21 light infantry battalions in the Allied Army at Waterloo came from Allied forces. The 3rd British Division, for example, had over 2,300 light infantry in King's German Legion and Hanoverian battalions. The final action of the day saw Sir John Colborne bring the 52nd Light Infantry round to outflank the Old Guard of the French Imperial Guard as it advanced towards the British centre in a last-ditch attempt to defeat Wellington. As the column passed his brigade, the 52nd charged, fired a destructive volley into the left flank of the chasseurs and attacked with the bayonet. The whole of the Guard was driven back down the hill and began a general retreat to the cry of "La Garde recule." After their unsuccessful attack on the British centre, the French Imperial Guard made a last stand in squares on either side of the La Belle Alliance. The 3rd Brigade charged the square which was formed on rising ground to the right of La Belle Alliance and again threw them into a state of confusion. The other square was attacked by the Prussians. The French retreated away from the battlefield towards France. Structure at Waterloo: 2nd Brigade, 52nd Regiment of Foot, 71st Regiment of Foot, 2nd Battalion, 95th Rifles. Detachment: 3rd Battalion, 95th Rifles. 1st Brigade, King's German Legion, 1st Line Battalion, KGL, 2nd Line Battalion, KGL, 3rd Line Battalion, KGL, 4th Line Battalion, KGL, 3rd Hanoverian Brigade, Landwehr Battalion, Bremervoort Landwehr Battalion, 2nd Duke of York's Landwehr Battalion, 3rd Duke of York's Landwehr Battalion, Salzgitter. Crimean War. The Crimean War was fought between Imperial Russia on one side and an alliance of France, the United Kingdom, the Kingdom of Sardinia, and the Ottoman Empire on the other. Most of the conflict took place on the Crimean Peninsula, with additional actions occurring in western Turkey and the Baltic Sea region, and is sometimes considered to be the first modern conflict and introduced technical changes which affected the future course of warfare. A light division was again formed for service, but this was in name only, as no light infantry battalions were assigned to it. The division was involved in the Battle of the Alma, which is usually considered the first battle of the Crimean War. Took place in the vicinity of the River Alma in the Crimea. An Anglo-French force under General Street, Arnaud and Lord Raglan defeated General Menshikoff's Russian army, which lost around 6,000 troops. They were also engaged in the siege of Sevastopol and a Battle of Inkerman before the end of hostilities. Structure during the Crimean War: Commanding General, Lieutenant General Sir George Brown. 1st Brigade, Major General William John Codrington, 33rd Regiment of Foot, 23rd the Royal Welsh Regiment of Fusiliers, 7th Regiment of Foot. 2nd Brigade, Major General Sir George Buller, 77th Regiment of Foot, 88th Regiment of Foot, 19th Regiment of Foot. 1 troop of Royal Horse Artillery, 1 field battery Royal Artillery. By the late 19th century, the concept of fighting information was on the wane and the distinctions between light and heavy infantry began to disappear. Essentially, all infantry became light infantry in practice. Some regiments retained the name and customs, but there was in effect no difference between them and other infantry regiments. World Wars. During World War I, 2 light divisions were formed, the 14th Division and the 20th Division. Both served on the Western Front and were involved in the major battles, including the battles of the Somme, battles of Arras and the battles of Ypres. The British Army did not form a light division for service during World War II, but the ethos of the light division was carried on in new infantry formations such as the Commandos, Parachute Regiment and the Chindits, all lightly armed, fast and agile units. 1968 to 2007. After the Second World War, the British Army had 14 infantry depots, each bearing a letter. Infantry Depot J at Farnborough was the headquarters for the 6 English Light Infantry Regiments, and Infantry Depot O at Winchester was the headquarters for the 2 Rifle Regiments and the Middlesex Regiment. In 1948, the depots adopted names, and this became the Light Infantry Brigade and Green Jackets Brigade. Then in 1968 the Light Division was reformed as an administration division with the regimentation of the Light Infantry Brigade and the Green Jackets Brigade. As formed, the Light Division comprised 7 regular infantry battalions, 1st, 2nd, 3rd and 4th Battalions, the Light Infantry, 1st, 2nd and 3rd Battalions, the Royal Green Jackets. The Light Infantry lost its 4th Battalion in 1969, while both regiments lost a battalion in 1992. In 2005, 2 further regiments were attached to the Light Division: 1st Battalion, the Devonshire and Dorset Light Infantry; 1st Battalion, the Royal Gloucestershire, Berkshire and Wiltshire Light Infantry. This was in preparation for all 4 regiments being amalgamated into a single large regiment named the Rifles, which was formed in February 2007. Regimental names of the regiments that formed the Rifles were not maintained. As a consequence, upon the formation of the Rifles, the name Light Division was no longer to be used. Before that, in 2005, a new Manoeuvre Brigade appeared in the British Army, 19th Light Brigade, as a fast, agile, lightly armed brigade to balance the mix of heavy and light brigades in the British Army order of battle. Bibliography. Standing Orders of the Light Division, printed in Holmes P.R.E. Acute CIs of Modern Tactics, pp. 257–277. William Napier, Peninsular War, B.K., XVI, ch. v. G.K. Rose. The Story of the 2, 4th Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire Light Infantry at Project Gutenberg. Hibbert Christopher. The Recollections of Rifleman Harris. The Windrush Press. ISBN 0-90075643-3. Keegan, John. The Face of Battle. Vintage. Smith, Digby. The Napoleonic Wars Data Book. Green Hill. Crawford, Rev. Alexander H. General Crawford and His Light Division. Reprint Naval and Amp. Military Press 2006. ISBN 1845740130. Haythornthwaite, Philip. Weapons and Amp Equipment of the Napoleonic Wars. Arms and Armor. ISBN 1854094955. Brassey's Almanac. The Peninsular War, the complete companion to the Iberian Campaigns, 1807–14. Chrysalis Books Group, 2004. ISBN 1857533291. Nofi, Albert A. The Waterloo Campaign, June 1815. Combined Books. ISBN 0938289292. Johnson, Ray. Napoleonic Armies. Volume 2. Britain, Prussia, Austria, Russia and their allies. RAFM Company.